I'll
This
maybe
conference will now be recorded.
I'll pick people out to ask questions if we get full time. If not, we'll read some out. So enjoy today, and if there's any questions, you know where we are at the Wigan Parent Forum. You can come back to us on our admin email address as well. So thank you all for coming, and we'll enjoy today's session. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to talk with you this evening. I hear great things about what Wigan Carers and Parents Forum do and have done for a number of years now. So it is actually great to actually have the opportunity to talk with you myself. I know that some of my colleagues have. So if I could just introduce myself. My name is Tony Lloyd. I'm a child and adolescent psychotherapist, and I'm the chief executive of the ADHD Foundation neurodiversity charity. And we are an independent and user-led charity that offers a lifespan service in Liverpool, but we do provide training nationally and internationally, mostly to education providers, but also to health and social care staff as well. So could I ask Sue and Lisa, could you move on to the third slide with the umbrellas on, and I'll just do an introduction to the actual presentation. That's the one. So you can see here, some of you may be familiar with this display through social media. There were umbrella installations in Heathrow Airport in Liverpool and in Greater Manchester, Salford, Media City, and next year there are, obviously we've had to postpone a lot of things for this year, but next year you'll see those. And this is really about a celebration of neurodiversity, and the great thing about it is it came from young people. It was about young people saying to us, I'm not stupid, I'm not thick, I'm not lazy, I'm not badly behaved, but actually this is something about me that, you know, I want to celebrate. Yes, I'm intelligent, I'm gifted. And what neurodiversity is an umbrella term that encompasses all those neurodevelopmental differences like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ADHD, autism, Tourette's, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And what we found through research is that at least 1 in 10, but more likely 1 in 5 human beings are neurodiverse, and more than half of them don't even know it. So there'll be people out there who have struggled at school, whose literacy skills are not great, who think that they're not very intelligent or very employable because they didn't do well at school. Well, what we understand now is that, you know, people who are neurodiverse are no less intelligent and no less gifted and no less employable than anybody else. And what the neurodiversity agenda and movement is all about is about saying, you know, that we are part of the natural variation in human neurocognitive capacity. There are no 2 human beings on this earth that look the same or sound the same. Every one of us is unique, and every one of us has a unique brain, but 1 in 5 of us have a brain that is neurodiverse. And if 1 in 5 of us are neurodiverse, then we have to ask ourselves the question, are we disordered? Is there something wrong with us? Are we errors of genetics? And really what we're saying is no. If so many people are neurodiverse, then from an evolutionary perspective, there's got to be a good reason why we're here. Now, that's not to say that having ADHD or autism or dyslexia or dyspraxia, or sometimes a combination of all of those things, isn't difficult. Of course it's difficult. But if the world understood it better, if parents understood it better, if our schools understood our neurodiverse children better, then we could adapt our teaching strategies, we could adapt our parenting, we could help adapt the world so that the world includes them, because there's an awful lot of them. And it's a very, very positive message. It's a strength-based message. It's not talking about this language of this deficit model of what my child can't do, how my child is disabled, how I am disabled, what I can't do, but rather talking about all the things that we can do. And I say that's not to dismiss or forget the fact that there are some challenges and difficulties to being neurodiverse, but if the world would wake up and understand this natural variation in human neurology, then maybe the world might be a better place for our children, and that's really what we're working towards. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? So again, really just to get those points across, did you know, for example, that between 32 and 35% of all entrepreneurs have either dyslexia or ADHD? Well, most of what I heard when I was growing up was that ADHD meant that you were naughty or lazy or fidgety or hyperactive, and we know that that's not true. That's actually a very small portion of those with ADHD, and often that context inappropriate behaviour, particularly in school, is not because children are being deliberately behaving inappropriately. It's actually because they find that kind of environment very, very stressful and very difficult. And we know that children will avoid things that they find difficult and sometimes get overwhelmed. And it's the overwhelm that is sometimes the cause of context inappropriate behaviour. So I'm not making excuses in terms of behaviour difficulties. I don't think we do our children any favours if we tell them that they're somehow not accountable for their behaviour. But rather than punish children, wouldn't it be better if we help them understand why their brain is a bit different, give them strategies to manage it, and teach them and show them how to cope better, rather than just tell them that what they're doing or how they're behaving is wrong, or that their work isn't good enough, because we've made an assumption that they know exactly what we're talking about, that they understand what we mean, and that they have the ability. Too often I've seen too many children's school reports where every teacher in every subject every year has said, Jane is a lovely girl if only she would concentrate. James is a lovely boy, very intelligent, but underachieving because he just won't concentrate. And I've often wondered why nobody's ever asked the question, if everybody's saying this child won't concentrate, is it occurred to anybody that maybe it's because the child can't, rather than the fact that the child is choosing not to? And this is one of the reasons why 7 out of 10 school exclusions are for children with learning differences like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. And the really sad part about all of that is that almost half of those children who are neurodiverse are not identified and not diagnosed by the time they leave school at 16. And this is why so many of our children underachieve at school and fail at school, is because our teachers aren't trained to identify learners who are neurodiverse and how to adapt their teaching and learning, and also how to make an appropriate referral to see a specialist clinician if they need to. And then, of course, we're into those challenging sort of experiences, aren't we, of very long waiting lists on NHS, which means that our children are struggling in education, but absolutely not getting the right kind of support they need early enough. And it is about young people making a stand and saying, please understand that I have different needs and help me achieve my potential and help me be the best that I can be. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So what is ADHD? In a nutshell, we all know that ADHD has 3 core characteristics. We know it has a component that is about poor concentration, poor memory, and easy distractibility. Now that sounds quite simple, but actually it can be a lot more debilitating than people realize. Now, for some people with ADHD, they are also impulsive. Sometimes they say things before they've thought about the consequences of what they've said, which is why so many professional comedians have ADHD. But they're not just impulsive of word, they're sometimes impulsive of thought and action and emotion. So it can be very stressful sometimes trying to keep a lid on that, because actually that in itself is quite stressful. And then there's the H, isn't it? The hyperactivity. This is the bit that everybody notices. But many people with ADHD are not hyperactive, or at least not physically hyperactive. Their brains are hyperactive. It's a bit like having a Ferrari car with bicycle brakes, or having a computer with far too many tabs open that, you know, slow down that processing speed. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? Well, what we're also looking at now with ADHD is that there are other characteristics of ADHD that doctors are looking at when we're trying to make an assessment. And one is low emotional resilience. In other words, children with ADHD are often very anxious, easily upset, easily frustrated, easily distressed, because they want to do as their parents and adults tell them, and often it's because they just don't have the self-regulation skills to do it. And another characteristic we look at is poor executive functioning skills, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I want to make these key points. ADHD is not a behavioural disorder. We need to be absolutely clear. It is a myth that all children with ADHD are badly behaved. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. And what it means is that certain parts of the brain are developing at a slower rate than they would do in 80% of the population. Well, what that means is that that delay is about 2 or 3 years. So your 12-year-old child is really only about 9 years of age. So when we expect children to all reach a certain level of academic progress in Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 3, or when we say we want children to behave in certain ways at various key stages, then immediately the neurodiverse children, and the children with ADHD in particular, are really going to struggle, because while they might be 12 years of age, many parts of their brain are still only 9 years of age. And we need to understand that from a developmental perspective. It's often why a lot of children with ADHD tend to have younger friends. ADHD is largely genetic. That doesn't mean that mum or dad have ADHD. What it means is the combination of their genes predispose the child to having ADHD, and it becomes evident in early childhood, and you don't grow out of it, you have it all your life. But here's the thing, your brain isn't fully developed until you're in your early 20s. So that developmental delay in your child, in your son or daughter, that causes them so much difficulty in terms of trying to fit in and trying to act their age, that developmental delay, they do eventually catch up by the time they're in their early 20s. But that's after most of them have finished their education. And that's why we need to make sure that if our children do have learning needs, that we identify them early on, and we make sure that we adapt our parenting and our home life appropriately, and that we, you know, work with the school to make sure that our child's needs are understood and met in the school environment as well. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? So if you can see from this slide, just to make things a little bit more challenging, it's very rare that anybody who has ADHD only has ADHD. And if you look at this diagram, you can see that almost half the people with ADHD also have dyslexia. Between 26 and 29% of children with a primary diagnosis of ADHD will have autism. And with something called dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, approximately half the children with ADHD will have that. nearly half of children with ADHD will experience tics at some point in their childhood, usually for a short period, often when they're very anxious or stressed, sometimes particularly during puberty when the brain is growing very quickly. So as well as ADHD usually coming with some other learning challenge, you could have traits of all of these different conditions, maybe not enough for lots of diagnoses, but you could also have difficulties with other aspects of learning. It's very rare that ADHD travels alone. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? And I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I do really want to make the point that when we're trying to discern whether a child has ADHD or not, using a behavioural questionnaire, an observational questionnaire, like a Conners questionnaire, is not acceptable as the sole source of assessing whether a child has ADHD or not. Because ADHD is caused by a different kind of neurology, a delay in development. And here's the thing, wouldn't you agree? All children can be a bit hyperactive, all children can be a bit impulsive, all children can be a bit inattentive because their brains are not fully developed. What makes ADHD diagnosed is when these normal characteristics or competencies or behaviors appear in a slightly different form. And, you know, anxious children can also be forgetful. Anxious children can also have poor concentration. Anxious children can also be agitated and hyperactive. How we treat anxiety is different from how we treat ADHD. So just observing behavior is not good enough. What we have to do is use things like QB check, which is a screening tool that Senkos can use in school that will screen a child's cognitive function. In other words, it will measure the child's brain functioning. And that's over 80% accurate. And it is a far better way of finding out whether a child has ADHD than purely by just observing behavior. But what we've got to recognize here is ADHD is not just about your genetics. The child's brain is growing very rapidly. So the environment in our children's early lives impacts on how their ADHD affects them. So the more we know as parents, the better our knowledge and understanding, the better our parenting skills, the better our children are going to be able to cope and manage and thrive. Similarly, in school, every teacher in every school should be trained on how to understand, how to identify, and how to adapt teaching and learning to meet the needs of every learner. That's what's in the Disability Act. And that is incumbent upon every school to make sure their staff are trained on how to identify children. It is quite heartbreaking for me when I get young people aged 16 referred to me for an assessment and I'm thinking, why has nobody picked this up before? Happens a lot with girls in particular. And the reason for that is the only children who get referred for an assessment are the ones who are more difficult in class. And this is one of the reasons I think that's perpetuated this myth that, you know, children with ADHD don't know how to behave. It's complete nonsense. We're missing half the children who have ADHD, particularly the ones who are not hyperactive. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Thanks, Lisa. So this slide here, if you look at the little image in the corner, you can see like a cup with different coloured balls. Now, let's say in this instance, the yellow balls represent ADHD. The green balls might represent dyslexia, the blue balls might represent autism, the red balls might represent dyspraxia. Sometimes you will be below the threshold for a diagnosis of other things, but you'll have qualities or traits of them. It's usually the most obvious thing that's given a diagnosis. So, for example, those children who have a primary diagnosis, research is suggesting nearly half of those also have ADHD. So we need to look at the child in the round and holistically, and we need to be thinking about what is the child's cognitive profile. And if any of you are interested in knowing what your own cognitive profile is, there's a smartphone app called the Neurodiversity app, and I think it's $2.99, and it takes about 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most to complete, and you will get diagrams about where your learning strengths are and what kind of strategies you would need to adapt and adopt in order to strengthen those areas where you're learning and thinking is not as strong. And it's very much a strength-based approach. And I think this is a far better way of assessing a child's progress rather than school exams or SATs, because school exams and SATs are very, very pressured. They're very stressful. I'm sure all of you can remember walking out of exam halls wondering why you could remember the answer to a question then, but you couldn't remember it when you were in the exam hall. We know that stress really impacts on cognitive functioning. So what we need to think about is not just the most obvious thing, but understand that people who are neurodiverse will also have traits of other things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. Can I have the next slide, please, Lisa? Thanks very much. So here's the interesting thing. Why are children with ADHD always on the move? There is a particular transmitter in the brain called dopamine. And dopamine plays a key role in memory, learning, behavior. And dopamine doesn't work as well in ADHD. And do you know what the body's natural way of producing dopamine is? The body's natural way of producing dopamine is to move. So the more you move about, the more dopamine you produce, the better you're able to concentrate. So now do you see the error of expecting children to learn effectively if they have to sit still and not move? And this is why when we're training teachers, we're saying to them, you need to design and deliver your lessons in ways that are much more proactive in terms of structured movement, because it is scientifically proven beyond a doubt that the more children are moving, the better engaged they are in learning. Can you move me to the next slide, please, Lisa? I mentioned before about something called executive functioning skills. Now, one of the things about executive functioning is it's the how of learning. Every teacher should know what executive functioning is. Now, executive functioning is what we call our working memory, what we can hold in our mind, and we could do a whole day of training on this. Our ability to plan and organize, our ability to regulate our emotions and how we feel, our ability to control our impulses. And when you have ADHD, those executive functioning skills are delayed. And I'm often saying to people with ADHD, how you feel isn't necessarily how it is, because we know that people with ADHD are struggling with learning, struggling with processing information, and that is stressful and it makes them anxious. And this is why boys and girls and adults with ADHD have wandering minds, that they're not very good at prioritizing and organizing and planning, and they have really poor time management and are often late. So we always advise people, use diaries, use your smartphone to send you reminders, use posters around the house, use post-it notes on your front door, on the fridge door, whatever it takes to help you feel in control of your life and your daily activity. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? So working memory, people often say, well, what is that? Working memory is that part of you that is able to hold a number of thoughts, memories, ideas, feelings in mind at any one time. And when you have ADHD, it means your working memory isn't very effective, which means you very quickly get overwhelmed with too much information. Sometimes it's like, people have said to me, it's like sitting in a room with 4 televisions on, all on different channels, and I can't process anything because there's too much going on. It's like their minds are too busy. Now, if we have a poor working memory, it makes us forgetful. And I often hear of children saying, they've been told off in school and given a detention because they've gone into a class, they've been asked to do something, and they've said, I can't do this. And the teacher said, yes, you can. You did it last week. You got a grade A. I know you can do it. I've seen the piece of work. So don't tell me you can't do it today. Well, here's the thing. If you've got ADHD, you can very easily forget what you've learned last week. And that's one of the major difficulties for young learners in school, is they can't remember what they've learned. They can't put that learning into long-term memory. And when it comes to exams, they really, really underachieve. It's not because they're not intelligent, it's because their memory is not very good. The only thing that will really improve that is medication. All the other strategies in the world are not going to improve that, or at least not by very much. But we'll come back to that later. So could you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? So with executive functioning, we know you have poor organizational skills, difficulty retaining and following instructions. So for those of you who think you've told your child something and they've ignored you or disobeyed you, let me be clear. If you give a child 5 verbal instructions, they're only going to remember the last one you've given them, or the first one. What you need to do is give them that instruction in a number of different ways. Write it down for them, ask them to write it down, ask them to repeat it back to you, but don't assume that they have remembered everything that you've said to them. And when you say, I want you to do this, you're going to have to ask them, I want you to do this, and I want you to tell me how you're going to do it. And teach them how to do it, rather than just assume that they're not doing as they're told. So, we need to think about how we help our children organize themselves, regulate themselves, help them develop learning strategies, particularly with homework, which is often a real flashpoint, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, so that they can develop strategies to compensate for poor executive functioning. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? So in terms of inattention or poor concentration, what does that look like? Well, if you're anything like Pooh Bear, you forget things that are needed in order to complete a task. How many of you have children who start something and don't finish it? They're very easily distracted, which is why we say, to teachers in schools, the wall where the board is and where the teacher is shouldn't have any displays on it. There should be no other distraction around the teacher. There can be displays on the sides of the classroom and at the back of the classroom, but absolutely not on the front wall. There are too many distractions. Children with ADHD and adults can make careless mistakes with written work. Their brains work faster than their pens or faster than they're able to type. They have difficulty sustaining attention, and they don't seem to listen, but actually it's not that they're not listening, it's that they've not processed that information in their working memory and have forgotten how to do it. Let me ask you a question, all of you parents. I want you now to think about a time in the past few years where you have been really, really stressed, really under a lot of pressure, not just having a bad day, but really, really anxious. Just cast your mind back and ask yourself these questions. Did it affect my ability to sleep? And how did being tired affect me the next day? Did I find myself forgetting things, forgetting where I put my keys, forgetting that I had an appointment, forgetting to pay a bill, forgetting that I'd left something on in the oven and now it's burned. How many of you as well can remember perhaps being easily upset, maybe being snappy and short or rude with people, with your partner, with your children? How many of you can remember when you were really stressed like that? How did it affect your ability to plan and organize yourself? Now, ask yourself the question. If you were forgetful, if you were losing things, if you were getting frustrated easily, if you were finding it difficult to sleep, if you found it difficult to plan and organize, if you found yourself impulsively saying and doing things because you were stressed, that's what it feels like for your son or daughter every single day. So when, as a parent, you get overwhelmed and frustrated by your children's needs sometimes, you need to take a deep breath, take a step back, and remember that this is what life is like for them all the time. They don't know any different. That's what life is like for them all the time. So when you are thinking about how you might help your child, we've passed the link on for the parents booklet, but we're saying that, please look at that, because there's a lot of really useful strategies in there that you can use that will help you understand your child. And when you understand, help them understand, so that they're able to thrive and be happy and not be too anxious or too impaired by their ADHD. Could you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? Okay, so the next slide really is, asking you what's your parenting style? And are you the kind of parent who is a controller? Are you the parent who wants to be their child's friend? Are you the benign boss type parent? Are you a grumbler? Are you the optimistic parent? Are you the one that constantly tries to cheer your child up and tell them not to worry and give them encouragement? Are you the competitive parent that always wants your child to be doing better and somehow communicating to them that they're not good enough? Are you the pacifist parent who does anything for an easy life? Are you the chatterbox parent, or are you the explosive parent who gets angry really quickly? It's important that we ask ourselves these questions, because we need to understand that being a parent is the greatest responsibility anybody's ever going to have. And let's be honest, the last few months have been probably one of the most challenging periods in all our lives, dealing with a very unprecedented situation where many families have been in lockdown, where their children have not gone to school. And I want to say, I hope that it's been an opportunity for you to spend some quality time with your children, to get to know them a bit better, to listen to what they have to say and their concerns and their anxieties and their hopes and their aspirations, rather than seeing it as somehow an imposition on you that you have the children at home. This has been much tougher for children than it has been for any of us adults, and we need to kind of think about that. Lisa, can I ask you to kind of move on to the next slide? And here you can see two dads with their son, and what we're saying here is that your style of parenting really affects the climate and the atmosphere in the family home. Your style models the behavior that children will copy, because that's how children learn. Children learn through the modeling the behavior of their parents and primary carers. And when we have to think about what kind of parent we are, we have to kind of look at some of our fundamental beliefs and values about life, and that will give us some clues. So can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? So here you'll see this is the controller's parent. This is the one where if your attitude is children should be seen and not heard, if you believe that, well, if one person gets away with it, they're all going to do it, so I'll make sure that nobody gets away with it, and it's a battle and I'm going to win it, and I'm going to let them know that there's no way I'm ever going to come out of any kind of disagreement or misunderstanding without winning. Are you the kind of parent who tells them what to do rather than shows them? Are you the kind of parent who threatens them with consequences? Are you the kind of parent who says, I'm going to get your dad or I'm going to get your mum to deal with this? Because if you are, then the quality of your relationship with your child is not going to be great. And it's actually going to lead to high levels of stress for your child, which is going to make their ADHD even more difficult to deal with. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? And this one is about the friend parenting style. You know, this is the parent who is perhaps trying to meet their own needs through their children, who want to do everything to make their children like them, rather than parent them in a way where they know that sometimes their children might not like what we're asking them to do as a parent, but we know it's important for them to learn. And I'm all for family agreements. And I think, you know, negotiation and agreement is really important. But we have to remember that this actually has its pitfalls as well. If we are thinking of ourselves as an equal to the child, that they are our friend, you know, pleading with our children to do something. Yeah.
Are we on the right slide now, please? I've just moved it one ahead.
Right. Okay. Well, I for some reason I can't see a slide. I can see somebody called Rita Etop, but I can't see the slide. Hiya, Rita. So I don't know what's happened to my screen.
Okay. So right, so we're on the friend parenting style now. Is that the right slide?
Okay, so that's the right one. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And the outcomes for this particular style of parenting is it can lead to insecurity, and it can impair our child's ability to develop that sense of independence. Can you move on to the next slide, Lisa? And this is the slide here, and it's called the benign boss type of parenting. And there are two slides with this heading, because the benign boss really is the parent who understands that being a parent is a job as well. We have a responsibility. If we're going to bring young human beings into the world, we've got to help them become the best that they can be. And we have to understand that children need and like and feel secure with boundaries. We know it is in the nature of children to test those boundaries, because children are curious and want to learn and explore and question why. How many of you have got children who always ask why am I going to do this? Why is it like that? And it's not good enough to just say because I said so. We do need to explain to them, you have to do this because it's important you brush your teeth, because your teeth are going to fall out, so you're going to have to brush your teeth. You know, your children should be helped to experience achievement, but also to understand that making mistakes is okay, because learning is a trial and error process. We're all making mistakes all the time. If they're not making mistakes, then there's something wrong. One of the things that concerns me when children have low emotional resilience is that when they make mistakes, they give up too quickly. And we all know as adults, don't we, that some of the greatest achievements we have are the ones that have took the most effort and the most challenge to actually get to that point. So sometimes being, the boss parent, it's not about being unkind, but it is about having firm boundaries, and it is about, say what you mean and do as you say, because your children need to understand. And you think that what you're saying makes sense to you, it doesn't necessarily make sense to a young child. So we've got to be very clear about what we say, and we've got to be very clear about our expectations, and we've got to be very clear about being supportive and encouraging and showing them how we want them to behave, and modeling and demonstrating how we want them to behave. We need to understand that sometimes things go wrong. We're not perfect as parents, but we do need to help our children understand that when we belong in a family, there are certain rules and regulations in our home so that everybody can live together peacefully. We have to respect each other. We have to be kind to each other. And you as a parent will know that it's bedtime because they've got school in the morning, and they might say to you, I don't want to go to bed. Well, you know as a parent that if they stay up late and they're tired all day, they won't get up in the morning, they'll be tired at school all day, and that's not good for them either. And that's the point where you have to be careful. This is what I have said that you must do. These are the home rules, and this is what you have to adhere to. By all means, give them 10-15 minutes notice at 8:45 that it's coming up to 9 o'clock bedtime, but mean what you say and follow through. Can you move on to the next slide, which is also about the benign boss of the benign boss type of parenting, please, Lisa? So again, what we're talking about here is we have to hold children accountable for their choices, but we have to give them praise and encouragement along the way. We have to help them learn how to do things. We have to smile when they make mistakes and help them understand that nobody gets it right all the time, and help them and show them how to do it differently, or ask them what do they think went wrong and what would they do differently next time around. So boundaries are a dignified way where the parent is both a leader and a coach, where the parent is helping their child learn how to take appropriate risks and how to manage their motivation. Because here's a really key point. Again, I mentioned before, how we feel isn't necessarily how it is. But young children's brains are not very well developed, so they are driven by how they feel. I want to do this, I don't want to do that. And then puberty, when their brain goes through this major growth spurt and we start developing into an adult, they learn very quickly that you can't go round saying exactly what you think, always doing what you want, saying how you feel, or acting on how you feel. Because if we all did that, then we'd all end up in an awful lot of trouble. How you feel isn't necessarily how it is. And for those of us as adults who may have experienced periods of depression, we know, don't we, that how we feel on a day colours the whole world that we're living in. But that doesn't necessarily mean to say that that's how the world is. So our emotions do influence our understanding and our perception of the world and the people around us. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa, to the one where we're talking about structures, routines, rules and boundaries? So again, just to make the point very clear, have clear expectations, help to motivate them, give them confidence and self-esteem, enhance their concentration by reducing distractions, and facilitate their independence. And if anybody uses the word, this phrase, attention seeking, all children are attention seeking. Children are born genetically programmed to feel attached or need to attach to a primary caregiver, because they need that constant reassurance that they are protected and safe. And it is overwhelming for a child if they think that the love of their parent has been withdrawn. Yes, our children can frustrate us and disappoint us sometimes, but that doesn't mean to say we can't in a calm way say, look, that behavior was not acceptable and this is the consequence. But let's be just as generous with our praise, and let's be as good at noticing the things they get right and recognize that and praise them for it, you know, whether it's kindness, sharing, being considerate, having good manners, cleaning up after them, cleaning their room. Notice the things that they do right. Children respond far better to that than criticism. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? So I'm not going to spend too long on this. You can see structure, routine, timetables all around the house, on the child's bedroom door, on the fridge, on the front door, weekly timetables and a daily timetable. And if they have a phone, program reminders into their phone about all the things that they need to remember. Don't expect them to remember. Children have no sense of time at all. I don't know if you can remember what it was like when you were a child, but I remember on the 1st of December thinking that Christmas was way, way ahead, and the excitement and the frustration of waiting 4 weeks till Christmas. Now, as an adult, Christmas seems like yesterday, and before I know it, it's going to be back upon us. Children have a very different sense of time, and children with ADHD in particular have a different type of circadian rhythm in their brain where their sense of time management is really poor. What they might think takes 10 minutes will take an hour. What they might think might take an hour will take 10 minutes. If your child's doing homework, don't ever, ever say to them, well, you can go out as soon as you finish your homework, because the pen will be flying off the page and they'll get it all done in 10 minutes, or so they say, so they can go out, when they've not done it at all. What you need to say is, the teacher's told me that this homework is going to take an hour, so you are going to spend an hour on this activity, and you can't play out until that activity is done. So help them learn how to manage and plan and organize. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So on this slide, you'll see the heading of organizational aids. Again, morning, evening. And if you've got your very young children, you know, put a big poster on the wall that says 7 a.m. you get out of bed, you go to the toilet, you have a shower, you wash your teeth, you brush your teeth. And then even the order in which they put their clothes on. Put your socks on first, then your underwear, then your pants, then you should really break it down for them in clear, structured, managing, easily to manage ways. If you just give them verbal instructions, they're not going to process that, they're not going to remember. So be as clear as possible. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? And here you'll see the question, what is routine? So again, this is about a clear structure. Children really like routine and structure. If they can get up every day knowing exactly what is expected of them and what that day is going to involve, that will significantly reduce a lot of their anxiety. Children like routine and structure and boundaries, and particularly children with ADHD, you know, even if a weekend you get up at the same time, you go to bed at the same time. And if mum and dad have agreed that they're going to have a lie-in, then you make sure that the children have an activity or something to do that they can stay in their room with before they start disturbing or disrupting the rest of the house, particularly for children who have poor sleep and who wake up at 4 in the morning. If they can't get back to sleep, there's no good saying, right, go to sleep. It's not like there's a magic switch that they can just go back to sleep. Maybe it's about saying, well, here's an activity that doesn't involve looking at a screen or a phone or a computer or television, you know, some kind of activity, whether it's reading or even a talking book where there are no lights on, that will help distract them and give them some peripheral kind of distraction that will help them eventually get back to sleep. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa, where it says an ADHD friendly home? So again, a lot of this is outlined in the booklet for parents, which is available on the link that parents and carers have. You know, make your home ADHD friendly. You know, a bedroom is a place to relax. It shouldn't be a place of punishment. Try not to think of punishment. Rather than punish, teach. I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be consequences, you know, but if you're going to have a consequence whereby if a child doesn't do their chores, their pocket money is deducted by £1, then when they do something well, then the reward has got to be worth £1.50. So the rewards have to be worth more than the sanctions. Children have to learn that doing the right thing ultimately is far more worthwhile than making a mistake and doing the wrong thing. You know, so be generous with your praise and encouragement, but always make your rewards twice the value of your sanctions. And again, you know, careful things. Don't leave matches lying around. Children are curious. What child doesn't like playing with fire? You know, have a safe and quiet place in the house where the child can go if they feel overwhelmed. And if your child is particularly struggling or anxious or frustrated, or they've got angry, then, you know, that's not the time to have the talk. You wait until they've calmed down and then you have the talk. Even if it's the next day and you have to remind them about what happened the day before, you say, okay, right, let's talk about this. You got really angry, you were rude, you wouldn't do as you're told. What was happening for you? Why did that? Let's explore how we got to that place where you were so angry and rude and wouldn't do as you're told. How did that happen? And help them understand what their triggers are for certain things. You know, it's fascinating sometimes, you know, children can get really stressed and anxious about the fact that, you know, they have to go to the shops. Well, maybe they particularly really don't like going to the shops. But we need to explore that with them and help them understand that. We've all got our own triggers for stress. For some people, it's your mother-in-law or your father-in-law. For some people, it's a particular TV show. We all have things that we like and don't like. We've got to help our children understand and learn how to self-regulate and how to make choices that work best for them. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa, which kind of is a slide where it shows different coloured rooms. Now, I don't know about you, but if I lived in a house where the bedroom or the bathroom was bright yellow and bright red, that I would find that really quite overwhelming. So think about your child's bedroom. Is it a place that is calm, or is the wallpaper so busy and full of footballers and the things scattered all over the floor? Is there so many things going on in there that it's actually not peaceful? It's actually full of distractions. A bedroom should be a calming and relaxing place with pastel colours and boxes for toys and things like that, organised in a very clear and tidy way. And you can say, well, my child just won't do it. Well, what I would say to you is do it with them until however long it takes for them to learn to do it for themselves. And then we can talk about incentivizing them around, well, this is your pocket money, but your pocket money every week is contingent on you doing your chores. And one of those chores is that you make sure your room is tidy. And sometimes they'll need help, as long as they get there. But often it is about do it with me or show me how. And you're going to have to show them repeatedly. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? And on this particular slide, we're talking about family agreements and setting goals. Sometimes, you know, having a goal board or a target board, having a family agreement where you've all sat around the table and you've discussed what kind of home you want to live in, How do you want to be treated? How do you want to be spoken to? What are the boundaries and rules here? And make sure that the children have some say in that, because then if those rules or boundaries are broken, then, you know, we go back to, look, well, this is what we agreed as a family. This is how we treat one another. This is what we do so that we can live in a nice home that's clean and tidy. This is what we do so that we can have dinner at the table together as a family. But also help them learn how to set goals. I do worry sometimes that we live in such an instant society, don't we, where everything is available at the touch of a button. And life isn't really like that. The most important thing to all of us is our relationships. If I was to ask every one of you, what's the most important thing in your life? There isn't probably one of you that wouldn't say either my children, my husband, my wife, my friends. The genetic imperative in human beings is relationship driven. We thrive in relationships. Loneliness actually makes us ill. Loneliness is a killer. Relationships are what make us thrive and feel alive and energized. Falling in love is the most wonderful thing in the world as long as it's requited. Relationships are what matter. But in order for relationships to work, whether they're with our children or with colleagues or with extended family, then there have to be certain boundaries or rules or expectations around what we expect of anybody. If they want to belong to this group, we all have to behave within these boundaries. And that's what happens in schools. In a classroom with 30 children, there has to be a set of rules that are distinct to that classroom so that every child is safe and every child can learn. And if a child is struggling with that, then we understand and explore why they struggle to behave in a way that is context appropriate, and show them and help them and give them the support they need so that they can belong in that classroom. Too many children with special needs are getting excluded from our schools, and we have to do something about that. Can I ask you to move on to the next slide? For many of you, homework is a flashpoint. I'm going to try and move through this very quickly, but there are lots of things that you can do to really help your child with homework. I know it is often a real stressor for children. It might actually be a good idea if we did a webinar for you around how you support your children with homework, because I know that this is often the cause of arguments and fights and frustration when children get home. They don't know where to start, they don't know how to do it, and they very quickly get overwhelmed. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? One of the things I advise all children, if you see this slide now, it's got a big mind map on it. Let's be clear, children don't have to be sat down to be doing homework. You can be stood up. You can have posters like mind maps where you can draw an image with lots of bits of information on things. The brain remembers pictures more than it remembers pages and pages of words. So it's really important that with mind maps, particularly if you're using different colors and things like that, they are a great revision tool. When they've done their mind map, they can put it on the bedroom wall, and without realizing it, every time they go to the bedroom, they're doing some revision, which is going to help them with exams at the end of the year. And posters are much more fun to do, and actually a far better learning tool than writing out pages and pages of notes. So again, talk to the Senko in your school, talk to the teachers in your school, and make sure that your child is learning how to develop learning strategies that are appropriate for a child with ADHD. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? Again, just some useful tips. You know, allow children to fidget. When they're fidgeting and moving, they're more likely to concentrate. Allow them to have short breaks between headphones every 20 minutes, but not to go and put the Xbox on or watch the television, because they'll never come back to the homework. If they are sitting down, make sure they stand up every 15, 20 minutes, do some stretching exercises or movement exercises. Keep the type of learning as varied as possible, whether it's instructional videos on YouTube, whether it's making notes, whether it's doing bullet points or posters, whether it's acting something out from a book that they've got to read. It's got to be as engaging as possible. We only remember about 10% of what we read, but we do remember about 70 to 90% of what we actually do. Help them with their sleep. If they're on medication, be consistent about what time they get it. And remember that if their medication is designed so that it wears off by 3:30 when they finish school, and they've then got homework of an evening, they're going to struggle. So you need to discuss with their doctor, do they have medication? If they've got homework of an evening, do they have to have a bit more medication later in the afternoon? Is there a homework club at school where there's going to be somebody that they can ask for support with homework after school before they come home? And remember as well that, do's work better than don'ts. Let's be positive and constructive. Let's try this. And you don't have to know the answers when they set homework. Sometimes you just sitting there with them and saying, show me how, that kind of reassurance is often enough. Learning should be a joy, not a torture. But, let's remember, we can't use ADHD as an excuse. It can't be an excuse for what we can't do. We have to help children learn resilience and perseverance and persistence. It's okay to make mistakes, as long as we come back to it and we try, not just try again, not just try harder, but try it in a different way so that we get a different result this time. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Lisa? Very quickly, I want to go through this. This slide here shows you a picture of a computer tablet. This is the way of the world, isn't it? Social media, video conferencing, Snapchat, FaceTime. Let's help our children adapt to the 21st century. Help them learn appropriate manners and etiquette about how to use social media. Let's be really, really clear about what might constitute bullying or rudeness or anything offensive on social media, because once it's out there forever. Social media has been a godsend in terms of helping people stay connected and be in touch during the COVID lockdown. So let's learn how to use this in a sensible way. Technology is amazing. And for those of you parents who are interested in assistive technology, things like Microsoft Office 365 effectively eliminates a lot of the difficulties with dyslexia. If I were to ask all of you parents, how many of you wear glasses? If you were to take your glasses off, would you be able to read? Would you be able to do your job properly? No. So having glasses partly removes the impairment. If you've got ADHD, taking medication partly removes the impairment. Microsoft Office 365 does so many amazing things. And, if a child has additional needs, then we can work with the school and say, okay, well, my child will need a computer and they might need a set of headphones so they're not distracted with the children, because we can have Microsoft Office 365 that actually is reading out what's being typed to the child as they're doing. So it's really worth exploring how assistive technology can help. Can you move to the next slide, please, Lisa? So we're going to be looking at this blue slide about assertive body language and active listening. I'm very conscious of time here, so I don't want to go through this too quickly, but also I'm conscious of the fact that we're probably not going to get through everything, and I do want to allow some time for questions and answers. So think about active listening. Think about how you can encourage your child without interrupting or jumping to conclusions, but helping them explore for themselves how they feel. There's another slide here on active listening, and you can see what we have here. It's saying, focus on what your child is saying, be interested, pay them attention. That's what children need, and that is our job as parents, to be that for them. I know we get tired and we need to have special time and private and alone time and time with our partner And that's where you being organized and having boundaries is going to help you, as well as your children, be able to live a harmonious family life. Keep good eye contact when you're talking with your child. Don't interrupt them. Don't jump to conclusions. Ask them questions that are open, not questions that, well, was school good today, where the answer can only be yes or no. Ask them, tell me what you did in school today. What was that like? What friends were you doing that with? Make sure that the questions allow the child to think and process and give you better answers. Can I ask Lisa, can you move on a few slides here where we look at this communication wheel and the refocusing refocusing a conversation? So you can see a communication wheel here, some very simple tips. Good listening skills will help your child learn good listening skills. Talking calmly and more slowly will help your child calm down. Talk positively, be encouraging, give them praise, ask them open-ended questions, and allow them time to think and come up with their responses. Can you move on to the next slide, Lisa, where we're talking about refocusing the conversation? You know, where the child says, when you ask them who's done this, they say it wasn't me. Rather than say yes it was, don't lie to me, they say, well, I hear what you're saying. Let's explore what's happened here. Facilitate a conversation rather than make automatic judgments. Again, we're here not as judge and jury, we're here to parent our children and help them learn how to be the best that they can be, how to behave appropriately, how to be kind. We want our children to have friends. How many of us have been brokenhearted that our child didn't get invited to a birthday party, or our child wasn't invited on a school trip? We've got to help them learn those things, and we know that they find those things more difficult than other children, and that's why we have to be as informed as we can be and as patient and as kind as we can be. They didn't ask to be born with ADHD, and it's much more difficult for them than it is for us. You know, the world can be a very scary place even for us as adults. Can you imagine what it's like for very young children who at the end of the day are relying on you to protect them from all the things in the world that they're frightened of? Can I ask you to move on to the slide where we've talked about planning. We've talked a lot, haven't we, about positive praise. Can I ask you to move to the slide, Lisa, where there's a set of traffic lights where it says stop, think, do?
Done.
And again, this is a very, very kind of well-known thing, just having that sign there. What does the red mean? The red means stop and think. It's an alarm for us. It tells us to wait before we say or do anything. So stop, think, do. Give children little catchphrases or mantras that are going to help them. Things like I statements, you know, let the other person know, I want you to go and clean your room. I want you to be more kind and considerate towards your sister. I want you to think about how we're going to make sure that you get all the homework that you need to be done. I want you to be more positive. I want you to be more helpful. You know, don't be afraid of I statements. And this idea about, you know, make the right choices. I mentioned before about, you know, good behavior, positives, you know, we need to give them twice the value of the things that they don't do well or properly. So, you know, it's okay to say to your child, well, if you really want to do this, or you really want to go out on Saturday to laser tag or whatever it is they want to do, then, you know, there are certain chores in the house that need to be done. You're going to have to earn that right. And sometimes you've got to be honest and say, I'd love to be able for you to go, but genuinely, I just can't afford it. There isn't enough money for you to have that bike. There isn't enough money for you to go to this particular event. We've got to be honest with them. We don't have a bottomless pit of money to give them for things. We've got to be really candid and say, we just can't afford it. And we have a choice about what we can spend money on. Can I ask you to move on to the slide about praise and criticism, Lisa? So again, I'm asking you, think about a time when you were criticised. How did it affect your feelings when you were criticised by your boss, by a friend? Remember how much that hurt. So let's think about, if we're going to be critical of our children, think very carefully. Are we criticising the behaviour, or are we criticising the person? It's not you're naughty. It is that behaviour isn't very helpful. That is not the kind of behaviour I want to see. There is a difference between challenging behaviours and challenging identity. I'm going to move quickly on because I know we're kind of getting short of time here, and I'd really like to encourage you to go through the parenting booklet because there is a lot more in there. But can I ask you, Lisa, to take us to the slide about medication, which I think is slide 51. Can everybody see that? Really like to make this point because we're nearly finished now. Medication is not a cure for ADHD, and medication is not a morality pill. It does not teach children with ADHD how to behave. That is not how it works. It just helps them think better. That's all it does. It is not a behavior pill. Now, medication isn't right for every child, but please don't read all the myths, believe all the myths. Make an informed decision. If you've got concerns about medication, talk about it with your doctor, talk about it with the school, talk about it with other members of the family. Medication on its own is not how you manage ADHD. You don't wait for a diagnosis to start managing ADHD. Medication is one of just many tools in the toolbox that we have in managing ADHD. A lot of the things that we've talked about, but medication really is very, very effective for most children. But it's not an exact science. It takes a while to get it right. We need to work out what's the right medication, what's the right dose. But on its own, it's not enough. It doesn't teach children manners. It doesn't teach them how to clean their room. It doesn't teach them how to do their homework. All it does is it helps their brain function properly so that they can concentrate, so that they can hear what you've said, so that they can understand the world around them. And it makes the world a slightly less frightening place. But daily exercise, and I mean daily exercise, daily stress reduction strategies like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and if you don't know what that is, look on YouTube. All of those things are absolutely essential for managing ADHD, not just medication. So we're almost there now. I'm not going to say too much about diet and nutrition other than the fact that omega-3 supplements are a must for every child, particularly children with ADHD, because we know it helps with brain function. A good diet that is not too high in carbohydrates or fizzy drinks. Breakfast is really important, especially if it has protein like eggs and beans. And I'd also like to draw your attention, the last two slides, there's two booklets. One's called A Lifetime Lost or A Lifetime Saved, which is available from our website free of charge. And then another one, which is the Patient's Guide to What You Should Expect from the NHS. If you are concerned about your child and their need for additional appointments or medication reviews or assessments, get that booklet, download it and print it and take it with you to the school and to the GP and to the clinic. And be informed about what it is you should be asking for so that you can advocate for your child's healthcare. And as I say, there's the parenting booklet, which Lisa and Sue have, which is full of tips and ideas and strategies as well that you might find helpful. I'm sorry we've had to kind of fly through the last few slides a little bit. I do apologise for that. I hope you found it helpful. I am eternally grateful to you that you've tuned in at the end of a really busy day as very tired parents, but I hope you found some of this useful. And if any of you do have any questions, please feel free to email me and I'll do my best to respond to all of them.
Thank you so much for that, Tony. A lot of questions come in there. We have got them written down and we're going to collect that information and send it to you. One of the things that probably came up probably for a lot of families in here was about adults being diagnosed, because I think quite a lot of families have realised that some of the things you've talked about actually refer to them as well. And while they've been wondering about their family, youngsters, littlies, they've also been worrying about themselves. So that's really quite an eye-opener to some families. But one of the things were, what age do you get what age can you diagnose ADHD generally?
6 years of age.
6 years of age, right? That's great. We got that back.
There is a possibility that that's going to be officially reduced to 5 years of age. We're waiting for that to happen.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And some of the other things are a little bit more deeper to ask. But when you think about adults being diagnosed, what process would they need to go through to get diagnosed as families?
They need to download a booklet, the booklet on the Patient's Guide to ADHD. So the NICE guidelines, that will tell them everything that they need to know about how to go about it. And there's also a booklet on the website called A Guide to ADHD for Adults, and they can download that, and that has lots of useful information as well. But again, I would urge, for those parents who've realised as adults that they have ADHD, start managing it now. Learn as much as you can about it now. Don't make the mistake of thinking that getting a diagnosis and getting medication is going to make everything okay. It's not that simple. ADHD requires a whole range of strategies to help you manage, be at your best, stay healthy, be able to be the best parent, the best partner, a good colleague, do your job well. It's not just about getting a formal diagnosis and getting medication. And if you think that that's going to solve everything, you're going to be very disappointed. But learn about what it is and how it impacts on adults, and help, get the right information and support and learn how to manage it successfully. What I will say to you is be prepared for a very long wait on the NHS to get an appointment to see an adult ADHD specialist. And if you think that the waiting time is too long, then I would advise you to contact your MP, because the only way things will ever change or services for ADHD will ever improve is if you actually write to the decision makers who you've elected into Parliament as your MP to represent you, to say, I want something doing about this. Because at the moment, waiting times are just appalling. They are 1, 2, 3 years, and that's a long time for people who need help and support. But what I'm saying is, you don't wait for a formal diagnosis. If you think you've got ADHD, start doing something about it now.
Thank you for that. That's really informative, and I absolutely agree with you. And also, the other thing is, you've got some great resources on your website, the ADHD Foundation. Sometimes it's having the place to look and knowing where to look. Some information isn't quite as accurate as others, so the resources you have on there are really, really useful, and you can look as a parent as well as looking for your child as well as looking for an adult, and that's really very, very useful for people. And to be honest with you, we've asked you to cram a whole day session into an hour, which was just amazing. You've done fantastic.
I'm so sorry for rushing it.
I think that the reality is that what we would hope for in the future is that we can maybe put on some longer sessions, but we're very mindful that families have got children at home and that they aren't necessarily going to get value for money. So hopefully when things settle down, we'll get you guys back and we'll do a whole session where we can look at, particularly like you think about executive functioning, how that impacts. And I think as well, families actually realising that if you're struggling with some of the things yourself, that's going to be really hard to disseminate that down some of the structures and things if you're not able to do it as well. So that's coming across pretty much in the questions. So what we said we'd do is we'll take all the questions off. People have given their emails that want to come back and get some information. I'll pop them across to you, and if you don't mind, just answer them, and we'll feed them back to the people who've put their name on the information. For those who didn't want to put the email on there, what we will do is we will put it back onto our Parent Forum website, which is on there at the community. If you look on the link, you can see that, and we'll actually keep you informed. Don't forget, we've got some exciting speakers coming up in July, and when I say exciting, we're talking about some really good ones.